Assalamu alaikum. This is lecture number 7 in Pakistan Studies. The topic we are going to discuss today is Muslim politics in British India, 1924 to 1935. Under this topic, we will be discussing 6 major developments. Number 1, Delhi Muslim proposals. 2, Nehru report. 3rd, Quaid-e-Azam's 14 points. 4, the Simon Commission. 5, the Roundtable conferences. 6, the constitutional proposals given by the British government. These 6 major developments have to be studied against the backdrop of the political developments that were taking place in mid-20s from 1924 onwards. One significant development was the end of the Khilafat movement. The Khilafat movement, which we have discussed in our lecture number 6, that had come to an end. Then the efforts to promote Hindu-Muslim unity had also suffered. But the Muslim leaders were still trying if somehow some kind of understanding can be developed with the Congress leadership, some kind of arrangement that could guarantee Muslim rights, but provide a formula for cooperative action. So that was the second basic consideration or backdrop of all these developments. The third backdrop was the efforts to evolve a package of constitutional reforms, because the British were planning to make constitutional changes in the next couple of years, and both the Congress and the Muslim League wanted that they work together and evolve some kind of proposals which may be presented to the British government. So it is against the backdrop of these developments that you can understand the today's topics. Let's take up the first major development of this period, and that is Delhi Muslim proposals of March 1927. From 1924 onwards, the Khilafat movement became very weak. The Khilafat committee existed, but it was now a weak body, and a host of Muslim organizations began to come up. The Muslim League, which had been pushed to the periphery during the days of the Khilafat movement, was now again coming back on the front of the political stage. There were a couple of other organizations also, and they were all considering the issue, how to deal with the issues and concerns which are of primary importance to the Muslims. Now, all these leaders and the organizations that were there at that time decided to meet in Delhi and prepare an outline of plan to be presented to others, to the British government. So they met in Delhi in March 1927, and I may mention some of their main demands. One, in case of Punjab and Bengal, the Muslim majority must be retained. That was their first demand. Second, no weightage should be given to the minorities in the provinces. Third, Sindh should be separated from Bombay. At that time, Sindh was part of Bombay. It was being administered from Bombay. And the Muslim demand was that Sindh should be separated from Bombay and made into a separate province. This was the demand. Next demand was that there should be constitutional reforms in Northwest Frontier Province. I may mention here that the Northwest Frontier Province came into existence in 1901. Before 1901, the province of Punjab extended from the Afghanistan border to Delhi. All this area was Punjab. In 1901, the British Indian government decided to create a separate province called Northwest Frontier Province, that is, Northwest Frontier Province of today. This was established in 1901 by the British because they thought that the whole province of Punjab, spreading from Delhi to the Afghan border, was too large and too unwieldy. So Frontier Province came into being, and the Delhi proposals of 1927 demanded that there should be more constitutional reforms in that province, so that gradually this province comes at par with other Indian provinces, and NWFP was a Muslim majority province. And in addition to this, the Delhi proposals demanded that in the central legislature, 1/3 seats should be reserved for Muslims. Muslims should be there at least 1/3. Although their population was less than 1/3, the Muslim population at that time was approximately, it's a roundabout figure, about 25%, and they wanted 1/3 representation. Another important recommendation or proposal was that if there is some legislation that pertains to a particular community, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, any community, if 3/4 of its elected members in the House say that that particular legislation is to the disadvantage of that community, will hurt that community, then that legislation will not be pursued. In a way, Delhi proposals were kind of safeguards which the Muslims wanted for protection of their interests, political interests, in this part of the world. They felt that if these guarantees are given, then the Muslims will be willing to surrender the separate electorate. You would recall that in 1906, a deputation of Muslim elite met the Viceroy at Shimla and demanded that the Muslim representatives should be elected by Muslims only. That is what is separate electorate. And this principle of separate electorate was incorporated into the Indian system in 1909. From 1909 onwards, separate electorate was one of the important political demands which the Muslims were making. However, here you see a flexibility on the part of the Muslim leaders who argued that if Delhi proposals are accepted, the proposals which I have very briefly outlined to you, if those proposals are accepted, then Muslims will not need separate electorate. They will be willing to surrender principle of separate electorate. In other words, the surrender of separate electorate was conditional, subject to acceptance of those demands. This also shows another thing, that separate electorate was a strategy, not a goal. It was a way of achieving goal. It was a method. Goal did not change. What they were talking about was a strategy. Goal continued to be the same: protection and advancement of Muslim identity and interests and their rights. So they thought that if all those guarantees are made available, the guarantees that were given in the Delhi proposals, then Muslims could show flexibility. Because the Congress party was opposed right from the beginning to the principle of separate electorate. So it's, in a way, it's a kind of a gesture which the Muslims were making. The reason was that at that time, while on the one hand formulating their proposals, the proposals which they thought are needed to advance their interests, they were also willing to cooperate with the other community. Desire for cooperation, desire for working together, desire for creating an agreed set of proposals for constitutional changes was very strong. And that is why you see this kind of flexibility in 1927, that if that condition is met, then they would be flexible on the issue of separate electorate. Therefore, these proposals, the Delhi proposals, are important not only for this reason, but also for another reason. Another reason is that after the Khilafat movement, when all Muslim organizations began to become active in the political forum, when Khilafat movement and Khilafat committee was pushed to the background, this was the first joint and shared effort to create a set of principles which were shared by all kinds of Muslims, different organizations that were existing at that time. It was a kind of multiple organization that were prevalent at that time. So this desire was very much there. However, subsequently, some differences arose within the Muslim League, Punjab Muslim League and the Central Muslim League. In fact, the Punjab Muslim League, under the leadership of Sir Muhammad Shafi, diverged from the Central Muslim League, which was being led by Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. and then people began to talk about the Jinnah League and the Shafi League. And these two groups diverged primarily on two major points. One was the issue of separate electorate. Should Muslims surrender that if certain conditions are made or not? This was one issue. The second issue was how to deal with this Simon Commission. I will be discussing Simon Commission very shortly. And when this Simon Commission came to India, most of the political organizations boycotted the Simon Commission. But Punjab League under Sir Muhammad Shafi wanted to cooperate with the Simon Commission. So because of these differences, they diverged. However, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah continued to work for bringing Muslims together and also for evolving and for promoting Hindu-Muslim cooperation for achievement of political demands. This cooperation was important because it was very much known that very soon the British would introduce new constitutional order. The last constitutional order came in 1919, and it was expected that 10 years after that, that is by 1920 or 1930, they would start working towards giving a new constitutional arrangement to India. And since that thing was in their mind, both Congress on its own, the Muslim League and other Muslim organizations on their own were working to formulate constitutional proposals. Quaid-e-Azam and number of other leaders thought that why don't the Congress and Muslim League discuss those things, and maybe they are able to evolve some kind of a shared arrangements. And then that could be presented to the British, which the British may be asked to incorporate in the new constitutional system which the British were expected to give to India. The second major issue that we are going to discuss here is the Nehru Report of 1928. Nehru Report can be understood with reference to what I said just 1 or 2 minutes ago. That is, that the Congress leadership, like the Muslim League leadership, was also giving a serious thought to preparing some proposals for the new Constitution of India, which could be presented to the British government. Now, in view of that, the Congress Party appointed a 10-member committee to prepare those proposals. This committee was headed by Motilal Nehru, and the secretary of the committee was Jawaharlal Nehru, father and the son. And you know that Jawaharlal Nehru, the son, who was secretary of the Nehru Committee, ultimately became Prime Minister of India after independence in 1947. And he remained Prime Minister of India until 1964. And that is why this committee is known as the Nehru Committee, because it goes by the name of the chairman who was father of Pandit Nehru, and he was Motilal Nehru. This committee deliberated on constitutional and political issues and prepared a report which was presented to all parties conference. This was different from all parties Muslim conference. This was all parties conference dominated by the Congress party. And this report was accepted as approved proposal for the future constitution of India. Now, if we look at the proposals of this Nehru report, it has some recommendations which are of direct relevance to Muslims. We will not be discussing all what was there in the Nehru report, but I will mention some of the issues raised in the conference that directly affected the Muslims. Or you can say that I will talk about those issues which dealt with the Hindu-Muslim question in British India. The recommendations which were in a way connected with, in negative sense, the Delhi proposals which we have discussed. Let me mention some of the recommendations of the Nehru report. The principle of separate electorate was rejected by the Nehru report. Nehru report also turned down the Muslim suggestion that 1/3 seats in the central legislature should be reserved for Muslims. It said there cannot be a reservation of seats at the ratio of 1/3 because their population was not 1/3. Then there are other proposals which they made. For example, one proposal was that there would be no reservation of seats for the Muslims in Punjab and Bengal on the basis of population. However, in Hindu majority provinces, seats may be given to Muslims on the basis of population. Then another proposal was that yes, Sindh may be made into a province provided it is established that it has sufficient resources to cope with the expenses of a separate province. In a way, it was a conditional kind of acceptance, not rejecting it, but not accepting it either. Similarly, for NWFP or Frontier Province and Balochistan, they proposed that some constitutional reforms can be done under certain conditions. If you look at these proposals, that is the proposals of the Nehru report pertaining to Hindu-Muslim questions, you will find that this report has hit the Muslim interest directly. In a way, this report was negation of what the Congress party had agreed to in the Lucknow Pact of 1916. You would recall that in the Lucknow Pact of 1916 between the Congress party and the Muslim League, both had agreed, which means Congress had agreed in 1916 for the principle of separate electorate, for a reservation of 1/3 seats, and also for principle of weightage. They had agreed in 1916. And now, in 1928, 12 years later, the Congress simply rejected, turned down what it had accepted in 1916. And this set of recommendations severely undermined the relationship between the Muslims or the Muslim League and the Congress party. Despite the negative recommendations of the Nehru report, Quaid-e-Azam still tried for some changes in this Nehru report so that it is acceptable to the Muslims. He, even at that time, did not lose hope, and he thought that he will be able to convince the Congress that if they show flexibility, if they show accommodation, then both communities can come closer and prepare a shared formula for the future Constitution of India. Therefore, he took up the matter with the Congress and he participated in the all parties conference towards the end of 1928. In that conference, he presented the Muslim demands, the Muslim concerns, primarily from Delhi proposals. And his idea was that if some of those demands are accepted and accommodated and Nehru report is modified, then this report could be acceptable to the Muslim League and the Muslim as a whole. Unfortunately, the efforts of the Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah did not succeed. Despite his best efforts, the Congress party, especially the hardliners in the Congress party, there were some who were prepared to accommodate, but predominantly the hardliners were not willing to accommodate, and as a result, Quaid-e-Azam did not succeed in bringing about changes in the Nehru report. And this was a disappointment. This was a disappointment because he saw that an opportunity is being lost. It is being lost because some hardliners in the Congress party were not willing to accommodate the Muslims and their demands. In fact, it is after this, that is after his efforts to bring about changes in Nehru report did not succeed. He is reported to have said that this is the parting of the ways. This is the point where in the political domain, Muslims and non-Muslims are now going on two different paths. Although we'll see that even in the later years, even in the early 30s, he tried to convince the Congress party to agree on certain basic principles so that there is a cooperation. But even in early 30s, Roundtable Conference in early 30s, that effort did not succeed. So it was, in a way, a parting of the way. It is against the backdrop of the Nehru report and refusal of the Congress to accommodate Muslim concerns that we can talk about Quaid-e-Azam's 14 points, which is the third major development that we are discussing. Jinnah's 14 points in 1929. Actually, this is a speech which he delivered in 1929, keeping in view all those developments that we have discussed, keeping in view the Delhi proposal, keeping in view the Nehru report, and then he, in that speech, he raises certain basic points in order to present Muslim perspective, Muslim ideas on the future of Constitution. Jinnah's 14 points, which I would be discussing very shortly, can be described as the charter of Muslim demands in British India. It was a concise and compact statements on what the Muslims were looking for in the future constitutional arrangement. It was a presentation of safeguards, guarantees, constitutional assurances, and commitments on the part of the majority community and the British government that they would fully protect the rights and interests of the Muslims and accommodate their concerns in the political system that was to be evolved by the British government. Now let me mention some of the major features of the 14 points so that you have an idea of what the Quaid-e-Azam was saying. Now before we start the outline of the 14 points, I would suggest that you keep in mind the Nehru report. Only then you can understand how Quaid-e-Azam's 14 points were different and how Quaid-e-Azam's 14 points can be described as a rejoinder, a Muslim rejoinder to the Nehru report. The most important point, the first point, which he raises in 1929 is that India should have a federal system with residuary or remainder powers with the provinces. The second point which he makes is that provinces should be given provincial autonomy. The reason why he was talking about provincial autonomy, because he thought that if provinces are given more powers, position of provinces is strengthened, then it will be possible for Muslims in Muslim majority provinces to run their affairs on their own. At least in those provinces where Muslims are in majority, they will have lot of autonomy and flexibility to run their administration. Therefore, he talked about federalism and autonomy, which was the second point which he raised. Third, he also emphasized that principle of separate electorate should be given to the Muslims. This was not something new. This was something which the Muslims had been demanding earlier, and now this comes back because the Nehru report had rejected that. 4, there should be effective representation of minorities in the provinces, but majority should not be reduced to minority. That is, give effective representation to minorities in provinces in a manner that the majority community is not adversely affected. 5th, in the central legislature, Muslims must have 1/3 representation. 6th point was that in the cabinets, both at the federal level, all India level, and at the provincial level, Muslims should have at least 1/3 representation. The next point, the 7th point, was that the boundaries of the provinces of Punjab and Bengal should not be changed that Muslim majorities become minority. Let me explain this point because this is a complicated thing. In case of Punjab and Bengal, Muslim population in Punjab was approximately 55%. In Bengal, it was 56%, so it's a marginal majority which the Muslims had. And this majority could be reduced by changing the boundaries of these provinces. You shift some district from Punjab to another province, or some district from Bengal to the neighboring province, and then Muslim majority disappears. That is why here the Qaid-e-Azam was emphasizing that the boundaries should not be changed in a manner that the majorities are lost in these two provinces. Then 8th point was religious freedom to all. This was not simply for Muslims, but for all those people who are living there. The 9th point was that if a law is to be framed and 3/4 elected members of that community think that this is against their interest, then that should not be made into law. So if 3/4 of that community say, it's a very high figure, and obviously you will have 3/4 strength only if that law really adversely affects the interest of that community. The 10th point pertained to the province of Sindh. The demand was that Sindh should be made into a separate province, because Sindh was, as I said earlier, part of Bombay at that time. The next point was that there should be constitutional reforms, constitutional changes in frontier province and Balochistan, especially in Balochistan, which was from constitutional development point of view very backward. Similarly, there was a need of constitutional changes in the frontier province, and Quaid-e-Azam demanded changes there. Then another point was that Muslims should be given representation, adequate representation in government jobs, and there should be adequate safeguards for Muslim culture, Muslim civilization, and their heritage, language, and education. All these points pertain to the identity of the Muslims developed over a period of time. Then the last point which he raised was that no constitutional amendment should be made unless all constituent units of a federation agree to that. That is, if you want to change the constitution, then you must deal with provinces, and all provinces should agree. So these were the 14 points which outlined the demands of the Muslims. The next topic that we are going to discuss is the Simon Commission, which is number 4 item. Simon Commission was a commission set up by the British to seek the opinion of the Muslim leaders on the future constitution of India. This commission first came to India in 1928, then in 1929, and in 1930, Simon Commission released its report. It's a 2-part report. First volume talks about the political and constitutional history of India, very comprehensive analysis. And the second part it includes the constitutional changes it proposes. The Simon Commission put forward some proposals, but the problem was that these proposals could not make much headway. The reason was that the Indian leaders boycotted the Simon Commission. They objected to it because Simon Commission did not include any Indian. All three were the British, and the demand of the Indian parties, the Congress Party and the Muslim League, Jinnah group, they boycotted it, but the Muslim League in Punjab under Sir Safi agreed to cooperate with the Simon Commission. However, most of these groups boycotted it. Therefore, its proposal for federal system, for a strong center, for 2 houses, and abolition of diarchy, and similar proposals like governor should not interfere in day-to-day affairs of the state, were not really very much welcomed by the Indians. Since Simon Commission was not really able to achieve what it wanted to achieve, the objective was to create a consensus to bring in Indians on constitutional proposals. Since that did not happen, the British decided to call roundtable conferences in London, where Indian leaders were invited to discuss the Indian political constitutional questions. 3 roundtable conferences were held. First roundtable conference was held in 1930, second in 31, and third roundtable conference in 1932. In the case of the first roundtable conference, Muslims were represented by important leaders like Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Sir Shafi, Maulana Muhammad Ali Johar, and Sir Zafrullah Khan. And the Congress leaders were there. But the problem was the gap between the two communities. They wanted federation, but the Muslims wanted more autonomy. They wanted strong center. On the question of representation, they were not willing to accept the Muslim demands as put in by 14 points. Therefore, they did not really achieve much. The second conference was held in 1931. By that time, Maulana Muhammad Ali Jauhar had died, and here Allama Iqbal was included in the Muslim delegation. In the Congress, Gandhi led the Congress party, and again they could not really settle the Hindu-Muslim question, the question of Muslim representation and separate electorate. Therefore, in 1932, the British government announced what is known as the Communal Award. That was done in August 1932 by the British Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald. By this announcement, the British gave separate electorate not only to Muslims but to other communities. The Congress party was very much upset, and Gandhi started fast unto death against this decision. That is, the British were giving weightage to the minorities, that minorities will have more seats in the provincial assemblies, separate electorate not only to Muslims, to Sikhs, to scheduled castes, and to others. As the situation worsened, Gandhi's situation worsened, the scheduled castes of Hindus agreed to the Congress demand that they will surrender separate electorate. So in order to save Gandhi's life, separate electorate was surrendered by the Indian scheduled castes, and then the third Roundtable conference was held. Third Roundtable conference did not produce any new result. The situation was there as it was. There was no change. Issues were there. The only thing was that because of arrangement between the Congress party and the scheduled castes at Pune, they had surrendered separate electorate, but Muslims continued with it. After the third conference, the British government issued a white paper on the constitutional proposals, which were taken up by the select committee of the British Parliament, and then British Parliament passed the law, that is Government of India Act 1935, which was passed, and that ultimately became the new constitution of India that we would be discussing in the future. We today discussed number of important issues. Those were the question of Hindu-Muslim relations, problems in that relation, and the constitutional issues that related to India, Muslims, and Hindus. We have found that despite best efforts, the Congress and Muslim League could not agree on a formula, and the British government had to give its own constitution. This concludes our discussion for today. Khuda Hafiz, until we meet again.